So again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today's presentation is titled Tips for Publishing. It is with great pleasure that I introduce you to our speakers for today, Deborah Baiden and Harveer Punia. Deborah Baiden is a guideline development methodologist at RNAO. She has 7 years experience in a variety of nursing research and education roles. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree from the University of Ghana in West Africa and a Master of Science in Nursing from Western University. Debbie is also a PhD candidate in nursing science at the University of Toronto. Harveer Punia is a registered nurse who started working at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario in 2021 as an implementation science manager. She holds a Master of Science in Nursing from McMaster University. Palliative care, health quality, and implementation science are some of Harveer's areas of interest. So welcome, Debbie and Harveer.
Thanks, Patricia, for the warm welcome. And thank you, everyone, for joining our session today, where we will be going over some general tips for publishing. But the session is really to help meet your needs, and we want to answer as many questions as we can regarding publishing that you may have and draw on your experiences from each other as well. So to start with, let's quickly first talk about why publish. So before we start, I wanted to get a pulse check of our group here and our audience. So maybe if you could respond in the chat box of, have you published before, or why you're interested in it? And we can start from there just to get an idea of where everyone is at. No, but interested, great. So general tips would be helpful. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so lots of people have not, or if somebody has published maybe a first article. So now I'm curious, what are some of your whys? Why are you interested in publishing? Could be for multiple reasons. Nurse-led innovation, great. Oh, someone has a written manuscript, amazing. Wanting to publish my thesis. Contribute to nursing in general. Important information to share. Drawn to it, amazing. Okay, thank you for sharing. Nice to see everyone's responses and why you're interested. And as you can see, people may have multiple different reasons that resonate with them. But here's just a few, and finding your why may motivate others to join you as well on the publication journey. So it's important sometimes to think about why do I really want to do this? So yes, research can help healthcare providers really determine effective best practices and directly impact patient care. So it can really advance the healthcare field and the nursing field, as some of you mentioned. It can also help raise awareness, really enable the data that you're collecting and generating to be widely available and transferable and reproducible as well in other settings, and hopefully easily understandable as well. So if some of you work in niche settings as well and are publishing research, it can really help other organizations as well to share really your learnings with the greater community. So of course, they'll be more widely available to your peers and community. It could also motivate and inspire others. So really grant recognition to those who may qualify for authorship. And this type of visibility can be really inspiring to other colleagues as well. And of course, the recognition of the author and authors. So it really allows you from a personal level to be intrinsically motivated maybe to enhance your own resume and professional development. It can boost up your resume and really highlight your achievements and passions, as well as potentially your writing skills and determination as well. And of course, reusability. So if you have a detailed description of your methods and your quality improvement projects, It's easier to reuse and allows that data to be potentially regenerated in future experiments or research and quality improvement initiatives. So lots of different reasons. So we want to talk a little bit about the various types of publications, and also note that not all publications have to be an original research article. So there's multiple methods to publish an article. But when we're talking about an original research article, these typically include randomized control trials, intervention studies, cohort studies, case control studies, but then there's also qualitative studies as well. And nurses tend to be very drawn to qualitative studies as well to get some interpretive description or detailed descriptions. So various different types of research that really depends on the type of data you're collecting. And Deborah will later go through the various components of research articles as well and break that down a little bit for us. Another is a commentary section. This is where clinicians and scientists really come to express their opinions, to pose important questions, share new ideas, debate current issues. So this can be editorials, letters, reflections, viewpoints. We also have clinical practice communications. So these articles are typically very practical, very hands-on, how to, what's new in nursing design or what's new in a field to really keep clinicians up to date on latest evidence and best techniques. So they can be clinical reviews, case reports, critical appraisals. So first, when you decide on a journal or a couple of journals, often what I find helps me is I go to their section of where they have the various types of publications that they accept. And then I'll go through and I'll see, okay, what really fits my need or my data that I'm collecting and what am I trying to do? And so then you can refer to see what will fit your need. And often they'll have examples of those types that have also been published in their journal. So you can refer to those as well. Okay. So as Patricia was mentioning here, we work with best practice spotlight organizations or BPSOs. And as she was saying, these organizations are in a contractual 3-year agreement with RNAO, and we really work together through a coaching role to assist them in implementing guidelines in their organization and promoting an evidence-based culture. So we wanted to share this resource with you that we share with our BPSOs regarding publishing an article timeline. So I just found that this timeline really helps break down the process maybe or highlights a process, even if your timeline or process may look very different. So year 1, for example, we encourage BPSOs and to really reflect on their gaps in practice, choose maybe the evidence that they want to use to support their implementation strategies to address these practice gaps. And many people may start to have really early lessons learned during this process. And at this point, sometimes it's just a good idea to become familiar with the publication process, maybe review some samples, connect with others, and start thinking about, okay, how do I publish or think about sharing some of these lessons learned with others? Then in year 2, typically they're reflecting on their progress, changes in practice are happening, and now you can really start to identify maybe potential topics. So any pearls of wisdom through this process of quality improvement, or in this case, implementing a guideline or initiative or intervention that you can share with others. And then you can maybe start shortlisting some of these topics of interest. Then of course, later, maybe in year 3, you may be reflecting on outcomes, some of the lessons learned much deeper, and now can really start thinking about maybe the aim, the methods, and implications of your topic. So now you're reviewing the data you've been collecting. Maybe you're connecting with other members of your team and seeing, okay, so where are our methods again? And let's talk about this and how can we share this with others? So this may not be your journey or timeline, which is okay, but just kind of an example that may help to break that down. Okay, and I'll pass it over to Debbie now to talk a little bit more specifically about where to publish.
Thank you, Harveer. So on the question where to publish, there are a number of places that you could publish your manuscript. For instance, you could publish your manuscript in a peer-reviewed journal or a non-academic type journal. So peer-reviewed journals are journals that undergo a rigorous peer review process, and it usually takes a bit of a time. However, you are assured that your manuscript has been assessed by experts on the subject or the topic that you are publishing on. And another thing about peer-reviewed journals is that the language is formal and the audience is usually academic, scientific, or clinical type audiences. Regarding non-academic journals, so non-academic journals, the language is informal, it's casual, it's usually serving the public. And also for non-academic journals, it doesn't go through a rigorous peer review process. And it is also much easier to publish in non-academic journals. So the next tip is elements to include in your manuscript. What are some elements to include in your manuscript? So usually a manuscript for the peer-reviewed journals, it has an abstract. An abstract is basically a summary of your research. So what is the summary of your research? What methods did you use? The introduction and the results, a brief summary of your research. And the main text of your manuscript is the introduction, methods, results, discussion, and also the conclusion. Most of the times, articles use the IMRD structure. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So the I is for the introduction. Introduction is includes your the gaps in the research. It includes also the significance of the research. The introduction also shows, introduces the reader to what your manuscript is about. And the M is the method. The method is like a guide to show the reader what you did in the research. So did you collect a survey? Was it an interview? What was the result is it reveals what was the outcomes of the research and also reports on the findings of the research. Usually it is best to include or use tables.
Sorry, Debbie, I think your audio is not working
Provides
there.
an explanation on what the findings mean.
Oh, sorry,
So
Debbie.
includes the summary of the results and links findings to other research. It discusses limitations of the research and leverages this to suggest additional research. If possible, mention implications to research for practice, policy, etc. The conclusion section provides final thoughts on the research and it highlights findings, key.
Hi, Debbie. Sorry, I think your audio went off. Hi, oh, Debbie. Hi, Debbie. Sorry, I think your audio is not working.
I think her mic might have stopped working, so she can't hear us.
You can hear us. So this is a bit of technical difficulties. So we'll get her attention. Sorry. Debbie, see if I can get her attention.
Sorry. So regarding the methods, so the methods is like a guide to show the reader what you did in the research. And so for instance, if you did a survey, you include that in the methods, you describe it in the methods. If it was an interview, you describe it in the methods section. And R is the results. The results reveal what was the outcomes of the research and it reports on the findings of the research. Usually it is best to use or include tables and figures to help you better explain your results. And also the discussion section provides an explanation on what the findings mean. So this includes a summary of the results, it links findings to other research, and also discusses limitations of the research and leverage this to suggest additional research that could be done based on your findings. Now, the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is done for funding sources and writing or research support by persons that are not co-authors. For instance, if someone provided proofreading assistance or editorial assistance, you could acknowledge that person at the acknowledgement section. Some journals also require disclosures to be made, for instance, conflicts of interest, etc. And there's also a section for references. The reference section usually comes at the end of your manuscript. So all sources that were cited in text of your work should be included in the references as well. So the next step is choosing the right journal. Choosing the right journal. What are the things to consider when choosing the right journal? After considering the elements to include in your manuscript, the following are some tips that will help you make the decision in choosing the right journal. For instance, consider who reads this journal. Usually, if you go to the journal's homepage, you'll find some information on the aims and scope of the journal to help determine the audience of the journal. And it's also important to know the audience of the journal so that you know the type of manuscript that you present to the journal. It is also important to know who you consider as needing to know the findings of your research. As mentioned earlier, consider the type of journal you want to submit to. So whether a commentary, whether you are going to submit a primary research article, it's important to consider that as well. And also consider whether a peer-reviewed journal or a non-academic type journal. Also consider the interprofessional journal options so that you could reach other members of the healthcare team, and submit manuscript to only one journal at a time. You could, if you have two manuscripts on two entirely different topics, yes, you can submit that to one journal. However, if you have one manuscript, you can submit that manuscript to two different journals or one journal, which is fine. But if you submit to more than one, yeah, that's not ethical practice. And also consider following author guidelines in journals closely to prevent your journal from being dex rejected. Most of the time, the journal states the word limit. So the word limit for the abstracts or the main body text of the manuscript. And sometimes, and they also include the referencing style. It's important to consider this author guidelines carefully so that your manuscript is not rejected. So what are some common reasons a paper is rejected? Is your paper too specific? If your paper is too specific or localized on one particular program or topic, if your paper cannot be used in other contexts, your paper might be rejected. And also, if the methodology is not well defined, for instance, it's important to state what was done in the research. Did you apply to ethics board? Was it approved? What was the survey? How many participants completed the survey, or how many participants took part in the interview? That should also be well defined in the work. And also the type of analysis that was done. For instance, if it was quantitative study, the type of quantitative analysis that was done. If it's a qualitative study, the type of qualitative analysis that was done. It's important to have the methodology well defined. If the methodology is poorly defined, your manuscript or paper may be rejected. And also, what does your paper contribute? Journals most of the time want papers that contribute to knowledge or advance existing knowledge. So you could ask yourself, what's new about this paper? What is new? Why should I submit this paper to a journal? What is this paper going to add? What is this paper going to contribute to advancing knowledge? So it's important to consider all those things so that your paper is not rejected. So these are the references, and we'll go over to the question and answer session.
So before we start, I just want to say thank you, Debbie and Harveer, for this presentation. So I think the tips are quite helpful, especially the manuscript elements and the tips for choosing a right journal. I believe that a lot of our attendees from BPSOs and other organizations would find this webinar and the tips you share very helpful in disseminating information about their QI work and other projects. So at this time, we're going to take some questions from the audience. And again, as a reminder, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them in the chat box and we will take it up right now. Sorry, someone's asking if you could see the reference again, Debbie. And Amy, we'll be sending a recording of this webinar out as well. Let's see, I think you have a couple of questions. So one question is that, is there a best practice guideline for academic faculty?
Thanks, Patricia. I can help answer that. So I'd like to share that we actually do have academic best practice spotlight organizations. So colleges and universities that actually use our guidelines, but they use them from a different lens. So for example, our academic sector organizations, they focus on evidence-based education to impact their faculty, student learning, and patient-client outcomes from that extent. So for example, if they're integrating patient and family-centered care best practice guideline, they'd be integrating it more so into their curriculum. So not specific guidelines, but transferable from a different lens. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Harveer. And I just want to bring up another question from the chat. I think you answered it already, but I wanted to read it out just in case it might benefit other people. To be clear, do you need to wait for approval or rejection before submitting a manuscript to another journal?
Yeah. You need to hear back from the journal on whether it has been rejected or not before submitting to another journal.
Right. Thanks, Debbie. And then I have another question. Are there type of qualitative studies that are more readily accepted versus others?
No. So once, like when we went through the things to include in the article, if the methodology has been well defined, it may not give cause for your paper to be rejected. There's not a type of like qualitative study that is more ready.
Oh no.
Sorry, Debbie.
Yeah, there's not one type of qualitative study that is more readily accepted or not. Once the methodology has been well defined, it will increase your chance of having the paper accepted. For instance, you could do an ethnography, you could do a grounded theory. There are so many types of qualitative research that you could do that would be accepted. Yeah. So make sure that the author guidelines have been followed clearly and carefully. That will increase the chances of the paper being accepted.
Thanks, Debbie. So I'm hearing from you that it's really about the methodology and following the author guidelines. I'm also hearing that we have to wait for approval or rejection before resubmitting a manuscript because it's an ethical standard.
Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie and Harveer. And I have another question. If a research proposal outline is created through taking a course through a master's program, what is the next step in the process of getting published? So it's in the chat. So if chat. So I think if a research proposal was created in the program, what's the next step?
Okay. If the research proposal was created in the program, the next step is, if it's a primary study, is to submit to research ethical board, especially if it's going to be involving like humans, which I understand that like with health research, yes, so it needs to go through research ethical review board, yeah, for approval, and then you conduct the study, and then afterwards, after conducting the study analysis and all that, and then you write up your research reports.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm hearing the first step is doing the ethics submission.
Yeah.
I'm hearing from you and then following the process. And I have another question. We have a very engaged audience, which is great. When it comes to understanding the requirements for submitting to a journal, should we be able to find all of that information on the journal webpage?
Yes, yes. On the journal webpage, yeah. All journals include that, and they include the author guidelines, yeah. So you should find that information on the webpage, yeah.
Correct. Another question for Debbie and Harveer. How long, great presentation. Then how long does it take on average to write a manuscript?
That depends on your motivation and the time you have.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very depends. I find if you throughout the process of collecting data have been writing kind of good notes throughout, really documenting what you've been doing, that can be easier to write versus if you need to go back and kind of relook at things. But personally, it takes me months. I don't know about you, Debbie.
Me too. Me too, yeah. Depends on motivation and the time to write, yeah.
It's no easy answer. It's really, it depends. Thanks, Harveer and Debbie. And I have another question for both of you. Is there a specific way to include the abstract at the beginning of the research paper?
Yeah, so the abstract is at the beginning of the research paper. And also when you're submitting to the journal, as I mentioned earlier, some journals have a word limit for the abstract. So it's important to consider that also when writing up the abstract.
Is there a specific format to include the abstract at the beginning of the paper, a format or?
So most of the time you could use the IMRD format, which is the introduction, methods, results and discussion for the abstracts, yeah. But also depending on the journal, some journals don't require the IMRD format as well. Some journals, they have the different formats. So look at the journal webpage for the guidelines. And also it's also great. Something that I usually do is that I look at when I look at the journal page, I look at some of the previous papers that have been published on that journal to see the abstracts that they did and how they presented their articles. Yeah.
That's a great tip. Thank you. And I have a question here asking if this recording will be shared. Yes, it will be used. The recording will indeed be circulated out to the audience today. It is also in the RNAO YouTube channel as well. Another question for the both of you is that what suggestions do you have in addressing comments from reviewers?
So comments from reviewers. So it's like most of the times when you get a comment from the reviewers, there are comments that help to better restructure your manuscript. So in addressing that, sometimes what I do is that I create a Word document and then create a table so that I'm able to identify each like comments one after the other so I don't miss any comments. And in addressing the reviewers' comments, you could say that sometimes you could justify why you did things in a certain way. For instance, so for my master's research, I did ethnography, and I did the ethnography in a certain way that I reference another aspect on ethnography. And one of the reviewer comments I had was, why didn't I do it in this and this way? So I had to justify it that based on the so and so person, This is why I did that. So the reviewer comments, there are places that you may need to justify why you did certain things. There are places that you would need to actually revise the text in your work. Yeah, and yeah, so there are two options. You could either justify why you did that or revise the test. Yeah, Harveer.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay. So just looking at the questions, I have another from, I think, from Linda. I think Harveer, you answered. Do you mind repeating it for the answer, Harveer? So Linda's asking, do you need to include interview questions, or if you use a tool to gather information, do we need to ensure that it's validated? And how long is the average waiting period?
Yeah, and Debbie, feel free to shed light. I was thinking more so if you wanted to include your interview guide, you absolutely can as an appendix to really strengthen your article, and won't have room probably within the manuscript itself, but as an appendix. Waiting period, probably at least a month minimum, but I don't know, yeah, others' experiences.
Yeah, that's true.
And I have another question about what kind of journals do you think tend to publish PPSO articles, or what journals would RNAO suggest, for example?
Yeah, I was thinking the Journal of Implementation Science can be a good general journal for BPSOs. However, you can also find sector-specific journals or more specific to the guideline itself that you're implementing. So for example, if you're implementing the end-of-life care guideline or one related to palliative care, then you can go towards the palliative care journal as well. Kind of multiple routes.
Yeah, I was thinking what you said, Harveer. Like, for example, if you did a pressure injury BPG, you could do a journal related to wound care, for example. So that's
Exactly.
excellent. And I have another question about, do peer journals accept case studies? Can different sections to MRDC be used for case studies?
Yeah, yeah. So peer review journals, yeah, they do accept case studies.
Right. So it's going through the questions, and then I know somebody commented about a literature review, and as Harveer said, literature reviews are absolutely manuscripts. Do any of you have recommendations for courses or books that help? Any other resources that can help with writing papers?
Regarding courses, so I'm currently like in school, so I usually go to the writing center and ask someone to like go over my work and provide tips and guidance as well on the writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of a specific course outside of graduate school that I've taken, but I know there's probably schools that offer kind of courses after you graduate for professionals, or maybe that's a good place to go if the school you've been to has a library that you can go to, the health sciences library, for example, or whatever library. They're often willing to kind of help. Books, I would have to go back into the list of books I had from grad school probably, but lots of books on, for example, qualitative studies. I remember there was a book specific to that. The methodology I used was interpretive description in my master's, and there's a specific book by Sally Thorne about that. So yeah, maybe we can try to gather some resources and send it out with this PowerPoint as well.
Thanks, Debbie and Harveer. Just we're going to the last few questions, and we'll have to wrap up soon. So I have a question from a public health nurse. She's using an arts-based research method, qualitative, phenomenological, and grounded theory as part of her master's thesis. Because she's working from an interdisciplinary lens, do you recommend that they submit to art therapy journals, basically a journal based on methodology, or a nursing school journal? Do you have any recommendations of which they should lean, or is that a personal preference? So submit to a methodology journal or to like a more interdisciplinary journal? Interesting.
So it also depends on the audience you want to reach. So for instance, you should consider the audience that the person wants to reach. So if you want to reach nurses primarily, yes, it may be great to submit to a nursing-based journal. Or if you want to submit to a journal based on the methodology, you could consider that as well. But I think it boils down to the audience you want to reach. So which audience do you want to read your manuscript or your article?
All right, thank you. And just one last question. Could you comment if there's not non-validated tools can be used? And if so, what kind of information about the tool would you need to share in the journal? Or have you already answered it? Perfect. Could just
Well, I would love Debbie's input as well, but I was thinking that a non-validated tool absolutely could be used, but you may need stronger just reasoning as to why to strengthen your article.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because providing the rationale would also increase the chances of being published. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Debbie and Harveer. So I've got some comments about how helpful your presentation has been. So again, thank you again for presenting today and for the engaging, and also everyone, thank you for the engaging discussion as well. So we're going to wrap up now. And again, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to take part in this webinar. And also thank you to Harveer and Debbie for sharing their expertise. So before we wrap up, we do want to encourage nurses, nurse practitioners, students, and other RNEO members to join the Nursing Research Interest Group, or NRIG. So NRIG supports and advocates for nursing research issues, as well as they also provide some research funding opportunities for novice to experienced nurse researchers. So you can join the Nursing Research Interest Group when you renew or when you join RNAO. The membership is $30 and it's free for undergrad students. So the annual membership benefits include educational webinars and events focused on current trends related to nursing research in Canada and abroad, exclusive interest group events and nurse researcher networking opportunities, including an opportunity to be part of the executive team as well. So that's a great opportunity to network and also learn from other nurse researchers about conducting research, publishing other topics. You can also get an email subscription to their newsletters 3 times a year. And by being a member, you're eligible to apply for NRIG awards for Masters of Nursing and PhD students, as well as research grants for PhD students and novice researchers, up to about $12,000 a year awarded. So this funding can help with any journal publishing costs as well. And you can also access any key nursing research resources, contents, and reference tools. We also encourage you to join RNAO now and enjoy a whole year of benefits with professional liability and protection and taxes included for RNs and NPs. So to join, you can visit join.rnao.ca. So for those of you who are participating in this live webinar, you'll also soon receive a link to an online survey to evaluate today's presentation. After you have done this evaluation, you will receive your certificate of attendance. In addition, please let us know of any suggested topics you would like us to work on. And please know that this work is funded by the Government of Ontario. Again, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and please do enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.